everybody's into making predictions. Many come up with futuristic hypotheses as if competing to single out the wildest and even the most absurd ones. Here's our, not his, our. Who do you think the our is? The mouse in his pocket? Who's this our he's talking about? Here's our contribution. What can happen in 2023? Number one, oil prices will rise to $150 a barrel. That would be crazy high, by the way, if you're not following the price of oil. About as high as it gets, generally. And gas prices will top $5 per 1 cubic meter. Number two, the UK will rejoin the EU. Told you these.
He said 5,000, by the way, because usually gas is
You're right.
$5.
Thank you. You're right.
Misunderstood.
$5,000 per 1,000 cubic meters. So I believe mathematically that
No, that would. If you're trying to say, but that's some conversion of the $5, that wouldn't even be necessarily that high. I mean,
right,
right now it's probably 2 or 3. I don't know, but it's
right,
$5 is not crazy.
right,
5,000 would be absurd. Yeah.
right. Well, number two, the UK will rejoin the EU. Number three, the EU will collapse after the UK's return. Euro will drop out of use as the former EU currency. Number four, Poland and Hungary will occupy western regions of the formerly existing Ukraine. Number five, the Fourth Reich will be created, encompassing the territory of Germany and its satellites. For example, Poland, the Baltic states, Czech and Slovakia, the Kiev Republic, and other outcasts. Number six, war will break out between France and this new Fourth Reich. Europe will be divided, Poland repartitioned in the process. Number seven, Northern Ireland will separate from the UK and join the Republic of Ireland. Number eight, civil war will break out in the US, California, and Texas becoming independent states as a result. Texas and Mexico will form an allied state. Elon Musk will win the presidential election in a number of states, which, after the new civil war ends, will be given to the GOP. That's the Republicans. Number nine, I told you these were hot. Number nine, all the largest stock markets and financial activity will leave the US and Europe and move to Asia. And last but not least, certainly not least, and I told you, hold on for number 10. Here it is. And I spent a decent amount of time talking about the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement, how the dollar became the default currency, why Russia hates this so much, why China and Iran hate it so much, and why they're joining together to try and maneuver the world off of this thing. Here's his number 10 prediction, that the Bretton Woods system of monetary management will collapse, leading to the IMF and the World Bank to crash, the euro and the dollar will stop circulating as the global reserve currencies, and digital fiat currencies, of which there's really only one notable one at the moment from China, will be actively used instead. Right. That is precisely why I said we would have to now cajole Russia into the quagmire of the situation they are now in Ukraine, because they actually very desperately want exactly number 10 to happen. That's why this whole shitstorm is underway. And it's also why I said and predicted, somewhat accurately, that similar maneuvers and sanctions and panda poking would start happening with China for the same reason. And what do you know, Joe? That panda is being poked. And we read a headline yesterday that the flight maneuvers are at all-time highs around Taiwan. And Taiwan today announced they're expanding the age range of, mandatory service. And that whole escalation is happening in a very severe way. China does feel poked very severely, and it is being poked, just as Putin feels like he was cajoled into Ukraine. And my point is, at no time did we formally announce hey, Taiwan is independent. However, what the UK is doing as we speak, we read the headline 72 hours ago, that the UK is floating very seriously the idea of announcing the end of the China one China system, which is essentially equivalent to announcing Taiwan independence, because you're saying you no longer that Taiwan no longer is part of China without actually saying that it's independent. But it's a distinction without a difference, really. Anyway, so this is all going on. And Dmitry Medvedev, the president of Russia, in his last prediction, ends his whole 2023 predictions by saying that the euro and the dollar will collapse and will be replaced by the Chinese yuan, effectively. Right. Yeah. That's why we pulled you into Ukraine, and we're going to beat you to death. We're going to do whatever it takes. So the reason I'm saying, why did I introduce this tweet thread now? Because it goes back to Cheryl's question. Do we want peace, or what do we really want? And what we really want is to cut the head off of this snake, who is, because this snake is specifically doing the one thing that we do not allow anyone to do, which is to threaten our position as the global reserve currency, period. The last person who tried this was Gaddafi. He was very swiftly dealt with. And he no longer casts a shadow on this planet. And we do that is our red line. China has a red line that you cannot recognize independence of Taiwan. Russia has a red line that you can't bring Ukraine into. NATO can't move west, and invite Ukraine in. And the U.S. has a red line, which is you can't even hint or joke or whisper or any of that about removing the dollar as a global reserve currency. Because if you do, you will die. Period. Period.
So none of these red lines create a rainbow, Tyler. So
Fair
just
enough, but
joking, but serious.
but this is the basis, the fundamental principles by which you can predict all future activities. And if that theory is correct, then the predictions will bear this out. And that's why, thus far, the the predictions that I'm making are based off the premise of that is what's driving these behaviors. And that's why if the fundamentals of what's driving the behaviors is understood correctly, then you can start to anticipate the future behaviors. And to a certain degree, with a certain degree of success, we have been able to predict these future behaviors that is happening, because we correctly analyze what is the underlying uh, motives behind all of these behaviors.
You know, his
You
wish
forgot
his
number
wish list
11, by
looks
the way.
like or his resolution looks like a wish list. But
Yeah, it's true.
though
Like
I mean,
Christmas
I know he
wish
says
for which Santa will never grant him, right?
well, I don't know, but and definitely not in a year. But some of those things you probably should think about. But the one thing that's very fascinating, especially as Kissinger is approaching his very end, um, is for him to see Russia and China come back together as much as we, and when I say we, the US, the West, NATO, EU, you name it, tried to split Russia and China. It's just fascinating, full circle in what, 50, 60 years? 50 years.
Let's also remember that Medvedev is the the person who on reporter television in Russia said that yes we do have a suitcase that we use to track extraterrestrial visitors, and I posted a link to that as well. So keep that in mind. He does have an interesting sense of humor, or he plays politics in a very non-standard way. So.
You know what? If you read a couple of the speeches, even from some of the leadership in China, when they laid out some of their views of threats that were not just here, they mentioned possible terrestrial. Could be asteroid, could be anything. You know what I mean? So, some people look at another dimension,
So Tyler, he's got
Also, the
his
Atlantic
11th
Council.
prediction. So number 11 was, he said that if at least 5 out of 10 of these don't actually come true, He mysteriously is going to drop out of a window. You forgot that. You forgot that one.
Where is that? I don't see that.
I'm making that up. It's
No, no,
a
that's that Russian Windows joke,
Oh,
right?
you're
The
so
Russian
bad,
Windows.
Ken.
He's not using
Yeah.
American Windows.
Wow.
He's not using Linux. He's using Russian Windows.
Yeah, because
Ken,
there
Ken.
were just another two oligarchs who got dropped out of a window in the last couple of
Yep.
weeks. Yeah,
No, no, the last week. I
week,
mean,
whatever
they
it
just
was.
keep
Yeah,
going. Yeah.
Just now, there's just one on BBC. The Russian sausage king just dropped off the window in India.
Yeah, there's
Can
a
they
person
not
on.
check into a place that only has one floor? I mean,
The
really?
Abe Froman of Moscow, the Sausage King of Moscow. That's a Ferris Bueller's joke for those
I
younger folks.
think
Anyway,
they should stay
Abe
in the
Froman.
basement,
Abe
Robert.
Froman.
So Johan's this window for garlic park is starting up with coming way.
Sausage King of Chicago. Anyway,
That was such a great movie.
Such a great
I
movie.
think Matt and I and Eric might be the only ones on that page. Okay.
Oh, I got it.
Okay. Yeah, okay, here we go. So we did the non-tech news essentially, but my God, is that Medvedev tweet thread hot shit. There's one other, no, well, that's the tech one. We'll save that for the tweets. Okay. So now we go into the tech news. That means I need to find that damn air horn
Just one more
and
about Taiwan's military extended by another year, right?
go ahead.
The Taiwan military, I mean the Taiwanese Sun is going to extend their military training for another year
Oh
to
yeah,
defend
Jerry
their country.
yesterday. I think we said that quicker than the new mainstream news report, and Tyler mentioned it at the beginning of this.
I think it's a good idea.
I think that's first the case, but yes, it's a good idea. But still, it just suggests the tension between the across Taiwan Strait. It's not a good sign. And I think those who can benefit from the wars actually want to escalate, no matter it's between Russia and Ukraine or Taiwan, China, like those weaponry companies. Yeah, right. Because like
Well, you
it's
know what it also has done? Two things. One, K-pop artists who were possibly seeking an exception before all this are definitely going through their boot camp right now.
yeah.
So
Robert, South Korean's culture is very different. They really despise those who escape those military service, but in Taiwan, basically, people think it's a waste of time. So the
no, no,
culture.
no, no. I agree. I'm just saying that most of them in the beginning, before this, were trying to get an exception, which some of the people didn't like. But with all this other stuff going on and it's viewed as a threat, of course, Korea considers it a threat. Then, lastly, though we laugh at what's happening to the oligarchs, this is very unusual. And you cannot, I mean, if I was a billionaire or something like that who once thought I was untouchable, because you don't know who's doing this. You don't know if it's Russian on Russian, Ukrainian on Ukrainian, or whoever on whoever. Um, you have to think some of the most wealthiest people in the world who thought they were untouchable are now double checking their security and who they have hired as their security.
No, I think they got to double check those windows, and that gravity has a way of just sneaking up on you.
Okay. Top tech story.
So,
Air
so,
horn, air horn, air
so,
horn.
hey Tyler, can we?
Yes.
There were at least some of the tweets. There were two tweets that I sent you that should have been done yesterday that were tech related
Okay.
that the relatively kind of important. Can we make sure we
Okay.
get to those as opposed to
Okay.
if you don't mind? Can we do?
Go
I'll read
ahead.
them if you want. Can I do that?
Sure.
Hold on.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
let me do it. Let me get it. So one of them has to do with, and I think this was probably said at a private function, and never should have been said anyway because now it leaked, and now there's a problem. They're going to have a problem. The Sony Interactive Entertainment, and Cheryl should have these because I tweeted these out 48 hours ago. If she wants to repost them.
I momentarily
Yeah,
will
the
check. Let me.
Sony Interactive Entertainment CEO reportedly
Yes, sir.
dismissed Game Pass as competition. The problem with him making that comment, which obviously I'm assuming it was made in private, because it's all about they only reference sources, right? Insider Gaming's anonymous sources is that they're trying to stop the Microsoft acquisition of Activision. Okay, and so the last thing that they need to talk about is that they're not worried about competition. Okay, so you can't on
Right.
one hand say to the United States
Right.
government, right, exactly, please block this acquisition, and by the way, um, we don't
We
consider
don't have
Game
any com-
Pass competition. So that I thought that was a an interesting story, and she can pin it, people can read it, and the other one has to do with a security
could
issue.
be that can prove to be an incredibly costly comment
Oh,
anyway.
absolutely, absolutely.
It's,
I'm, I'm,
so
I'm yeah, I'm amazed that he made that comment, even in a private conversation.
Right.
It's true.
Exactly.
Um, the other one is that there are is a story about the security issues in older Nintendo games, detailed in a vulnerability report. A new report finds some Nintendo games have security issues that allow a third party to take over the hardware, including saved payment information. And again, you guys have that tweet if you want to do whatever you want to do with it. And it's on my Twitter account if someone wants to look at it too.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So, top tech story today, Tuesday, December 27th, is. Oh, and by the way, uh, we have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday here in Clubhouse, and then starting Monday, which will be January 2nd, we'll be over Twitter Spaces. So, mark your calendars and follow the Tech News Twitter Club or Twitter account, which at TNATW on Twitter, too, so you can join the Twitter Spaces. All right. So, the top story is that Solana based NFT projects.
Did Calcanis put you up to this?
That's funny.
I say
So,
the thing no one else will say.
okay. Solana based NFT projects plan to leave the Solana ecosystem for Ethereum and Polygon. Who cares? Next, German researchers bought a US military device which was last used in Afghanistan in 2012 with fingerprints, iris scans, and other data on 2,632 people on eBay for $68. German security researchers studying biometric capture devices popular within the US government got more than they expected for $68 on eBay. The next is, oh, by the way, for the record, no, Jason didn't put me up to that. So the next is our friend Kuo, who's the world's most renowned Apple leaker, says that Apple plans an updated iPad mini in late 2023 with a new chip as its main selling point. A foldable iPad is unlikely to replace the mini. Okay. Next, Wall Street Journal. After shortages, chip makers face swelling inventories, mirroring the economy as consumers cut spending. Analysis shows falling lead times in recent months. Japanese manufacturer Kyocera plans to invest $10 billion in semiconductors, roughly doubling its previous investment. Next, from The Verge, they've done an interview with YouTube's chief product officer on why YouTube acquired NFL's rights, giving creators game footage, 4K broadcast, multi-screen, and more. Lawyers working on crypto bankruptcies, including FTX and Celsius, are charging more than $1,800 per hour, leading some creditors to criticize the process. So,
It's just
uh,
redistribution of wealth, Tyler.
yeah, well, I think they up their fees when the amounts involved, cross the multi
No, but
billions or
those,
whatever.
I mean, I've been involved in that process. Those fees still need to be, approved by a bankruptcy judge. And if there's, and they just, I think there's only been very recently, there's a formal creditors committee, and they could object to it. So I mean, and this is where it is. So I mean, that is a big number. I mean, one of the problems with really large bankruptcies, by the way, is that is the lawyers, and it's not just the lawyers for the debtor. Sometimes the creditors have their own lawyers. If there's bondholders with bond trustees and all of that, the lawyers, the accountants, the specialists, they suck out so much money, and as a rough number. Okay, the ballpark I used to use for a major bankruptcy, this is probably even more complicated than any a typical bankruptcy because of fraud.
It's a
It,
third, isn't it?
no, it's not a third. No, 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 no. It's like 10%. 10% of the value of the estate, if you will, goes to these kinds of administrative fees. So I mean, and that's a ballpark. I've never seen a third though. By the way, yeah.
Hold on one second. I just noticed something interesting. Okay, next up, an interview. Oh, I'm sorry, an investigation by Bloomberg shows how Amazon plastic shipping envelopes, which are discarded for recycling by U.S. and Canadian consumers, end up being burned in India, 80 miles north of New Delhi. CNET has done an interview with the Apple App Store president on Apple's Arcade, its lack of flagship exclusive games, and how it approaches game developers and why it's such a notable failure for Apple, considering relatively to everything else Apple does. But that's been true forever. Apple's always kind of sucked at games since day one. It's kind of odd. Um, the next one, the New York Times has done an interview with an AI researcher. By the way, before I read this New York Times headline, we must address which is an actual. This needs to be addressed. This is, we would be remiss if we didn't address this. Let me pull it up for you. This is really um, concerning,
The
honestly.
one that you share in the back channel.
And yes, hold on, I gotta pull this up. This is too important not to share. Where did it go? Where are you? Where are you? Right,
To share verbally
right here.
first, I'll
There,
pick it up for you.
got it. I got it.
Okay.
Here it is. So you can pin it.
Yeah, yeah. I'll do it.
I got it. Here it comes. So the New York Times wrote a story about uh, uh, SBF's arrest and whatnot in the Bahamas, and the trial that's going on, or whatever. And they did a tweet about the article. The article's headline is, as Cheryl will soon pin, it says, "In the Bahamas, a lingering sympathy for Sam Bankman-Fried. Residents there have a generous view of the disgraced FTX founder who has been accused of misusing billions of dollars in customer funds." They tweeted that article with the following tweet. "In the US, Sam Bankman-Fried is persona non grata, but in interviews across the Bahamas, residents say that his crimes were hardly comparable to the gang violence of the island and expressed fears of economic fallout if crypto investors don't return." Now, this is leading sane people on the left to say, what the hell is going on with the New York Times framing a narrative around this, what is now becoming by the day more obviously a fraud? It was unclear until relatively recent. It was somewhat debatable until, I don't know, 48 hours ago, when we now have the sworn testimonies, as I understand it, of the CEO of Alameda and the, what is his role? The chief product officer or chief technical officer, Eric Wong of FTX, are both saying on the record that Sam knew goddamn well that he was committing fraud. That he knew very, very, very perfectly well every aspect of what he was doing and exactly how fraudulent it was. Period. Period. So when the two main people that he's doing the crime, yes, it's a crime to steal billions of dollars from people, believe it or not. And how is it possible that somebody who's just stolen billions of dollars of people's money could have been used for presents this holiday season, or far more. So lots of people lost their livelihoods, lots, tens of thousands, and they're framing this as a, well, this is just too bad that this is happening in the Bahamas, and wouldn't it be nice if all this hadn't happened?
Typical
What
liberal Caucasian media
what
show a couple of articles of helping some poor chocolate people somewhere in the world, and maybe we'll get some violins going.
The first quote is, "I think he had a good heart," said Shemenka Moss, a Nassau school administrator. She was shopping on a recent afternoon at a beauty shop a few blocks from the prison where he was held for a week before he was extradited to the U.S. on Wednesday to face sweeping fraud charges. "He's Bahamian," she said, as part of the explanation for her sympathies. Yeah, he's as Bahamian as fucking Vladimir Putin. What on earth are you talking about? He's connection between the Bahamas and Mr. Bankman-Fried, who was born and spent most of his life in California, reflects a complicated set of circumstances. Oh yeah, it's so complicated. This is such a complicated situation underway here. This is
Yeah, he
so weird.
contributed. He contributed to their economy in a big way.
But
That's where the
well,
complication.
he still owes Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville bar $60,000 in drinks and bar tab fines.
Oh, that.
Anyway, just the framing of this is so distasteful and so distorted from how the New York Times should be covering what is actually an incredibly interesting story that actually has historical significance. Like 20 years from now, what's happening with SBF and FTX will still be of importance for people to remember, to make footnotes of, so that 20 years from now, when there's some, heaven forbid, but certainly will happen, relatable other transgressions and misgivings, and then we will refer back to this moment and be like, you remember that crazy kid in the Bahamas who stole, like we do with Madoff, where we refer back to Madoff from time to time, and we will refer back to SBF, and his family name will be cursed for generations because of this. And that's the context that it should be remembered in, that we learn from this mistake as a society. That's the important process of documenting this. That's the New York Times' fucking job, is to do that. And by writing articles like this, it completely distorts. In theory, hopefully, I pray to God it doesn't. I hope we don't get into Alice in Wonderland levels of, uh, cuckoo mamie, journalism, as is happening right now with the New York Times. Because if there's too many of this cockamamie bullshit, then 20 years from now, it's going to make the job harder of remembering the lessons that need to be learned from these types of situations.
But Tyler, is this any different than sometimes you'll see a story that some Mexican drug lord is really popular in his local community in Mexico, because he gives money to the schools or something. I mean, you do see this in other areas.
I'm just saying there's a lot of nuance and detail and interesting facts to be discovered and are unfolding. You don't need to resort to but what the people in the Bahamas. Here's the angle I want to go as the editor. Yeah, fuck all that. Here's the angle I want. Go talk to the Bahamans and write a puff piece about how he was liked there.
I think
What? What?
the real issue here, because like I said, I think there have been analogous stories about other criminals over time. Okay, is that the New York Times? This is not the first puff piece they've written for this guy. That's the most troubling thing.
Right.
There's a series of puff pieces.
Yeah,
Leading
that's right.
that's the more like that really raises the question why.
Right. Exactly. Oh, by the way, they have comments turned off on this article.
And see, that's the problem I have the with the media like this. If you're trying to reach the people, why do you fear hearing from the people? If you're trying to reach
Right.
the people, why do you fear hearing from the people? Why turn off the comments? Let them roll.
Yeah, Canada's
Right.
CBC turns off the comments after a few hours for controversial stories. So it's like a weird blend between like Chinese censorship and I don't know, an Orwellian novel. So it's kind of messed up to say, hey, look, social media, except no social, just media. Thanks.
Yeah, but we're talking one of our papers that say they are of the people or of certain type of people. I mean, what's going to hurt you with the comments? You know, let it roll.
Okay. Right. Now there's a consequence, there's a karma in effect here, because now I paused our regularly scheduled program to introduce that article because I was about to read this article from the New York Times about an interview with an AI researcher. But now, because of that last article of how they covered SPF and FTX and how they continue, again, great point, how they continue to cover the FTX implosion, um, I now have to disclose and make preambles and caveats about, oh, by the way, this is a New York Times article, so treat it, like the National Enquirer, that is probably completely fucking backwards, as Paul Graham tweeted yesterday. That wet roads cause rain. It's totally fucking upside down and backwards.
But if you remember, you can go all the way back 30 years ago, and who did the best job of breaking stories in the O.J. Simpson trial? The National Enquirer, not the New York Times. Think about
And there
that.
was, I just want to chime in on this point. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. Um, but I was just on Instagram yesterday and I saw a post by New York Times, and it was basically talking about these use of certain terms that we have or haven't caught on to. So, would you use the following words or terms: Latinx, BPOC, or AAIPI, which is the Asian American something, I forget the acronym, the word for it, the Asian American
Pacific
Pacific
Islander,
Islander.
Asian American Pacific Islander. Yeah. Yeah.
And these were, they interviewed 4,423 Americans. All of these terms, 78% rejected Latinx, 70% rejected BPOC, 73% rejected AAPI. And I think it's really interesting because it shows you that they, even the way that the New York Times article phrased the sort of analysis of the results, simply haven't caught on with the general public. We still have a long way to go. So clearly, the New York Times is not dropping this desire to want to normalize certain words or framing of issues, which and sort of even the question was, would you use the following words or terms: master bedroom? 84% said yes, versus primary bedroom, and I guess that's to do with gender neutrality. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't even know that master bedroom was a sort of offensive term, but anyway, they said. Master bedroom lives on despite the efforts to introduce primary. So quite clearly, the New York Times is really taking this position as sort of, I don't know, morality police, not the ones in Iran. But like, I just find it, this kind of thing, when they're publishing this sort of data, is, and sort of still not accepting that clearly this is not going to catch on with the general public,
Hey, Piotr, well,
and
the one
undermines
challenge.
their legitimacy
The,
as a news article, news
hey,
publisher.
hey, Piotr, the one challenge with that one on the master bedroom. There's so many people in America who only have a couple of bedrooms. There is no such thing as a master bedroom because all the bedrooms are the same size.
That's
So
a fair
that's
point.
kind of a sucky one for them to use as an example. You know what I mean? And it has no social issue other than a social economic issue versus a snowflake issue.
No, but Stanford University's IT department of all things, just the other day was a big story in the papers. They came up with a list of words that are problematic, and one of those words was master because of its this lineage to the slavery. So they don't want to use the word master. And everybody, the next question
Stupid.
everybody had was, "But
Wait,
don't you offer master's degrees? What are you going to call those?"
no, Ken,
Exactly.
it's worse than that. So that's what this is coming out as. And the master bedroom, or anything master, that was taken out a long time ago. If that's what they're talking about now, master bedroom bedroom was put down as a word you're not allowed to use in these circles ages ago. But to Ken's point, last week came out the Stanford Elimination of Harmful Words study from their IT department, and I suggest people Google that and look it up because it's getting very interesting. And it's not just you can't use professors can't have walk-in hours because if people can't walk, that would be offensive. You can't do blind random studies anymore because that makes it, again, we can't use the word blind. It has to be some kind of random something or another. So those are definitely out there. Anyways, Ken, thanks for bringing that one up.
What I find ridiculous is that clearly we've got a backlash, a pushback against this whole, policing of language, the Twitter files, that's emboldening people on the right against people on the left, this whole debacle about, the social activists of Twitter's employees pressuring the management. But instead of taking the perhaps wiser move of being like, okay, maybe we should reflect on how much we're trying to impose this sort of certain language and terminology, the New York Times, Washington Post, and others continue to double down with it, and all it's doing is polarizing the media or sides of the media even more, which I just don't really
Exactly.
understand why. It's not going to help anybody and resolve anything. So I saw that yesterday, so I just wanted to chime that in there.
I am confused. Why is master bedroom a not good word? Because in Singapore we have a master bedroom. I mean, we always have
It's
master
not. It's
bedroom
not
as
a
your best
Cheryl.
friend.
It's not a class. It's a master slave thing.
Ah, that's in the U.S.
So you're not
context.
allowed to use master in the Stanford study that Ken just referenced.
Ah, okay.
Years ago, we took like Berkeley took out postman, anything man, so no postman, policeman, any of that stuff. The Stanford one actually doesn't recognize gender, so there's not only no man and no woman. The words that would refer to a gender, and I'll go find some examples because I have it up on my computer. I mean, it's very interesting, and it's
It's like
interesting that it's coming out
no
of Stanford.
salesman but salesperson.
I think it might go to person. I mean, it's literally. Let me. Yeah.
Well, it has one goal, one good point, and that, to my mind, and my study is communication, and the point that it makes is how much our perception of the world is baked into our language, and the theory behind it is that if you change the language, you will change subtly our perception of the world. Now, the problem with that is it takes so long to do that that it probably isn't worth doing. But it does call attention to the fact that we have certain um, unequal and non inclusive concepts baked into the language, and that they are baked in from the past. And if it does nothing but call attention to that, I mean, I'm not going to stop using master bedroom, but
Yeah,
it
but
does.
But also, wait, Dr. Francine, really quickly,
um,
I agree with you on that premise, but some of these things go way too far, and so they're overdoing
Oh, of
quote
course they
snowflake.
do.
And also the other thing that goes on here, the other theme that goes on here, which these bring up the specific studies that we're talking about here, is that some of these are denying the past, and so the debate is: do you want to deny the past and subject, like things in San Francisco where they're painting over all of the old murals or changing all the streets, or here I'm in Marin, we're spending tons of money to rename streets because although it's been Sir Francis Drake Avenue for 100 years, that's not permissible. So now we're going to spend, I don't know how much money, and businesses are going to spend so much money because we're renaming streets. So we're denying the past rather than addressing it.
yeah,
Oh
and
yeah,
So I
we renamed. We had a peak called Squaw Peak in Phoenix, and about 20 years ago, they renamed it Tiesta Peak because it was Squaw was,
Yes,
obviously.
yes. Squaw Valley Ski Resort, which is where the Olympics were held here in California, is no longer Squaw Valley. It's Palisades.
Yeah. So we did that. Half the signs still say Squaw Peak. Half the maps still say Squaw Peak, and I don't know anyone who calls it Piestewa Peak, but it costs a lot of money to do, and it has shown me how things do not catch on.
Well, and to the businesses. So the beginning, just to give it here, the beginning, okay, San Francisco schools, I can't say those are well funded or well run, but during COVID, when they have a lot of issues, they were spending their entire supervisor time talking about whether or not to paint over historic murals in the, I guess it's called Galileo. It was named O.J. Simpson High School, but then it got switched back to Galileo. That so those supervisors were actually recalled, and here in Marin, again, shit show, businesses can't run, but the supervisors are spending all of their time talking about renaming streets. And it's not just the city time and the taxes that we're paying to have that done, it's that all those businesses have to change their addresses, their insurance forms, and everything else. I mean, that's the focus. So just here, I mean, and we're okay, we're California, so I guess maybe we expect that. But anyways, I just pulled up that review. If people pull it up, it's actually very entertaining. So you're not allowed to use the one from Stanford. You can't use blind study. It's got to be a masked study,
You
et
can't use
cetera.
the word
So,
grandfathered anymore for like if a law gets grandfathered or something gets grandfathered in. That word is prohibited, and it's not gender. It's not like they call
no,
it
it's not a
grandfather.
gender thing. You
It's not
can't
a gender
use.
thing. It's
You
an
can't.
age thing, Doctor
No.
Francine.
Yeah,
Right?
you
But
can't
I
use
just,
stand up. No
I'm
stand up meetings because what if somebody can't stand up? So can't no stand up meetings at work. They have to be quick meetings. Um,
okay. So
I've read
I
through all the.
understand, but
Oh my God. I've,
at least it calls attention to the fact that our language conditions the way we
It does, but
think
I
of
would almost argue
Hillary,
this one's going
there
to
was a
cause a
thing-
backlash. Look how much I took this to a holiday party this week because I
oh, of
thought this would be
course it
entertaining to
will.
discuss. It's going to be a backlash, and it's also everyone's question was who paid for this? Who's was this a volunteer group out of Stanford, or is this people who are salaried and assigned to this? And it, I don't know if we brought it up in this room before, but it was all over the news. So, it's
Curious.
well, I think this is like one of many pieces, right? I think when you come up with this, I mean, I read through the entire list and I said, okay, there's some things here that are okay. I would agree. Some things are blatant. O.J. Simpson, okay, I'll give you that one. I'll give you like five others. But I think what's happening is they're pulling the history or long-term cash into our short-term cash. And I think whatever you read in the media, whatever you read in news, is the intent to divide or unite us. And I tend to believe, not today, but I tend to believe everybody's hearts want to be together, right? I do believe 80% of the U.S. is on the same page. You've got your extremes on the left, you've got your extremes on the right. But whenever I look at something on the news, it's like, is this intended to retrain us and to try to pull the transgressions or the bad actions from the past into the present? And that's what I think it's doing. To your point, Jennifer and Dr. Francine, I think it's trying to recondition us, and I think that creates division. Grandfathering, like who cares? Master bedroom, who cares? Like it just doesn't make sense. So the reason I think we're on this call is because we question other easy sources of data. So I think this was kind of a misstep. But anyway, just
I
Wait,
have.
I'll jump, Matt. Let me just follow that really quickly since we were
yeah,
talking. Matt,
yeah.
100% agree with you. I think studies are
And we're both in
showing,
California,
and
Jen,
that
right? You're in NorCal and SoCal. Like I get it,
well,
right?
yeah, no, yeah, and actually, I just had my first family fight where my brother's now moving out of California. But
Yeah, but that's the
what's
holidays. That's expected.
yeah,
You're right on
yeah,
time. Right on
that's what
time,
everybody
Jen.
said. But I was like, that's the first time we've had that kind of fight. But anyways, that said, the studies are showing that we are not as divided as the news and media and politics and social media would like to portray. That really people do care about the same things, but that it gets spun up in these divisive. You find one person or one interest group, and we spin that up, and that happens a lot in politics and elections. And it's what we are lacking, and this is what I've been hearing in the news, is that we're lacking the structure or the norms of coming together and debating and common, civil debate and discussion, so that we're actually not as far apart. We've been farther apart in history, but we are really lacking that commonality and coming together, and that's the danger.
Get rid of the political parties. That's what causes it.
Can I
They
just
It's the
one thing though that this is all very American centric and Western centric. If you ask any Latin actual person, They don't want this sort of shit imposed upon them. I'm in Mexico, and I've shared this thing with loads of people among the, well, Mexican and Argentinian and Colombian. They're like, "Yeah, right. We're going to start using that shit." Quote. Literally, someone says that. So we've got to stop. I think part of the problem with this is it's created or devised amongst communities in different parts of the world, which think it's okay for them to take it upon themselves to think this is what every community wants. It isn't. Stanford is but one organization or entity which reflects a very different mentality in different parts of the world. And I think the New York Times would be better placed to actually be doing things of actual substantive investigative journalism than trying to do this kind of crap.
Well,
As
and
a
I
Latino,
think
I love that tee up, Piotr. And let me just frame it this way. I'm going to disagree with everybody in the room by saying the following. This is a long time coming reframing in a conversation. This is due to the sins of the silent majority. Okay, the civil rights movement is only what 50 years old. How old am I now, or whatever? That's what it is. I am Latino, and I'm not into the Latinx. But is the Latin culture sexist? Holy shit! It's amongst you could the highest handful of sexism is the Latin culture. So yes, I agree with all of your people you're talking to because yes, it's like Latinx. Well, it is something that's in very small segments of the states. Totally agree with all that. Am I ready to embrace it? Well, it's like I think we have to have the conversation. I'm not ready to embrace it yet either, but it's all about the conversation, everybody. So yes, it is uncomfortable, but that discomfort you're having is because of the tea you've been drinking. I've been kind of this, well, forget my life, but I'm just saying that these are the sins of the goddamn silent majority. That's the way you guys just inspired me to come up with that framing because that's what it is. You could be a little uncomfortable. It doesn't matter because the shit that's going on right now against gays, against women, it's like back the fuck off, white dude. And Christian white culture, we are a globe of everything. We are a stew. Humanity is a stew, and if I'm not killing somebody or ripping somebody off or doing some of the big, transgressions, don't tell me what I can do with this context of my life or that context of my life. Period.
David,
All right,
what you
I'm done.
no, David, what you said is absolutely spot on. And Piotr, I mean, yes, that's why I qualified, my statement to the U.S. and this is a tech news around the world call. And I would say that I wouldn't say this universally, but I think we have elements of extremes and different beliefs in the U.S. that reflect some of the global feelings, not to a T. But this is the debate that Jennifer, I get. It's not a debate because I don't like debating politics with family or friends. There's no point in it. It's a fool's errand. But I tend to believe, just drafting off of David's points, is that it is the silent majority. Of why is it silent? And it's silent because all the money, and I've said this for 2 decades, the money is spent in the extremes to divide. Decisions get made in the middle, in a rational environment. When they're not made in the middle, we go to war. We do things that are erratic, and it takes us a decade or maybe two to get back. So I think the one of the issues, and I don't have the solution for it, but when you think about how our political parties are funded, they're funded to the extremes because there's more money. There's more of a monetization opportunity. And I think we're seeing the chessboard or whatever metaphor you want to call reset. I was listening to the not to stroke Tyler here, but I was listening to the All In podcast as I always do. And if you start to look at the trends where people are getting their voices heard, as an example, somebody on Twitter now that all these feature sets are coming through. I mean, the attribution to what you consume, meaning you're not consuming the extremes, you're consuming balanced viewpoints with some of the features that this is not a pro Elon thing, although I'm a fan, I wouldn't bet against him ever, based on his historical performance right now. The whole landscape for how we consume our media is being reset, and it's going to happen very quietly over a very quick but medium short period of time, and these things that divide us, whether it's Jennifer, with the family or something. Today we're consuming our media from, CNBC. I did a screenshot, or Fox News, or CNN, or MSNBC. Well, the mainstream media, that's already been reset, right? We already have the data points. What I think is encouraging is we have balanced debates. We have, all in podcasts. We've got two on the left, two on the right. We have a rational debate, and it doesn't divide. At the end of some of these, good, and there's a lot of bad podcasts out there. At the end of that period of time, an hour, 2 hours, tech news around the world, we have diverse opinions on this call, but for some reason, most of us are still here. And I feel like since I've been on tech news around the world, whether it's on podcast or Twitter, I feel like there's no division between this group. There's a lot of people that come here regularly. I feel like we're more united. Like if we had to make big decisions, we could make big decisions that wouldn't be polarizing. So, David, just to
Wait,
draft
Matt.
off
Let
what
me
you,
add. Let me add to that, just to really quickly circle back.
sure,
I'm not at all against healthy debate. So I had a knockdown fight, but so I where we didn't come, we because it didn't come to the issues. It came to, again, back to what I'm talking about. It wasn't a healthy discussion.
right,
I think everyone here knows, like, I want to be real clear on that. I'm all for healthy debate and having differing opinions and differing views, but being able to, and it can get heated, but to be able to address those without going towards, there's unhealthy debate going towards the person, going towards whatever. And to your point, Matt, we already shown that media is biased and we're not getting accurate news from media. It's gone to clickbait and ad supported, even on the major platforms. And now you've got quote unquote people, journalists on the smaller platforms, which is good and bad. Some of it's good. We get news. We get on the on the street news, et cetera,
right,
or such we wouldn't otherwise get. But you've got a lot of fake news and disinformation. I mean, I question everything I look at. I don't care if it's visually correct. I don't care if it looks real, sounds real. I still question everything I see now, which is
yes,
exhausting. Honestly, it's
exactly,
exhausting, and I have the maturity to do that. But somebody else asked me, knowing all of that and knowing all of these disinformation stages, and I was with some other people who were, another educated group, and they were like, "Well, Jen, you know all that. So are you influenced? Do you really think you're influenced by media?" And I'm like, "Daily, by the minute, I know that I
yep,
am, and it's exhausting." But we know that, to your point, Matt, and we still and we can come together and usually debate things. And there's plenty. I know there's plenty of people in this room that I talk to in other segments and elsewhere where we have completely opposite opinions, and we may talk about them. There's vax, anti-vax, Trump, no Trump, but we are still good friends because
yeah.
we can talk the points. So just circling back on your issue.
Well,
Hey,
and
David, I
I
had a
won't ask you. I
question
won't
for
ask you
David.
exactly what your
No, no.
debate was about, right? I don't know if it was like what you
Well,
were
as you said, it
wearing or
was with a
what you.
brother, so there might have been family issues in there. I don't know. So, but I'll let it go back to Jared for a second. David, just have a quick question. Because to
Go
broaden this,
for it.
to broaden this globally, when is this? And I'm not saying it should. I'm just pointing this out. And I think you've actually acknowledged this last time we had this conversation in this room. When's the Spanish language going to change, which is actually has more gender, differences in gender than the English language. Even the word the between L and la, they don't use the word. They don't have a single word for the, right?
You
So,
know, it's exactly. So language. So remember, language is a component of culture, right?
and you think
And
that should
Spanish
change?
comes from Latin. So since I'm not fluent in French and Italian, well, Italian's the same thing. Then, as I think about it, I've never spoken really Italian in Italy, but I got by with my Spanish. so, so that's Latin. That is exactly that is the thing that we haven't reconciled. Does anybody? So another thing about language.
But
Well,
should it
I
change?
won't
I don't know
digress.
if it should change. I think there's something nice about having hundreds and thousands of years of a heritage like that. Why would you want to change it?
It depends, bro. And I appreciate the opinion. I will tell you, the best poetry is in Spanish. It's such an emotive language that you cannot tickle parts of the brain in English as you can in Spanish. One of the things I wanted to just state to that is that's the whole point. We had the Roman Empire and all of what it did, and back then that there was a bunch of cultural ways that people did deal with stuff. Right? Holy crap! Do you think that maybe there were some gays in Greece and in Rome, and in the Roman Empire? Right? But now look, they're not liberated to just kind of just live the way they want. Exactly right. It's still in scattered around the world. There's so much they kill you. It's so. So in any case, but I would say this: the by There's different strategies. If you are trying to cultivate a culture of inclusion, I would look at your point and kind of frame it this way. By not having the word Latina, you can't promote the fact that it was a woman. The anchoring was on the male. Latinos is the collective noun. In fact, maybe that's the grammatical way to think about it. The collective nouns are often, masculinated, right? And I'm just speaking off the top of my head on the fly on the conversation, but that's part of the challenge. But it's something that it's going to be a little uncomfortable for some of you. And even, you know what? I'll put it this way: it's going to be uncomfortable to everybody, right? But it's just part of our kind of, working
Well,
through
a part of what?
allowing other people to come to the table with a little bit less shit that society has put on their shoulders. So that's kind of the cost, right? That's the cost. So
Again, who's asking for this? You're sort of taking it upon yourself to
holy
say, well,
crap! I
it's going
just
to be
said gays.
uncomfortable,
Okay, wait,
it's going to be
who's asking for
difficult.
this? No, 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 no. Okay, Piotr, let me
Excuse
let me
me.
tell you. Let me speak on behalf of half the world's population.
No, no,
Okay,
excuse me. I
sorry.
think I think most language, all language have a female and a male version, right? So why are we discussing this on
Yeah,
tech news now?
and I
No,
think
it's the use.
Chinese,
Go ahead.
Japanese, Thai,
yeah,
every language have a female and a male version, and a
yeah,
masculine
agree,
and
totally
feminine,
agree
right?
with.
So what's the big deal? Why are we discussing or debating this here?
So let me share with you.
Because
I
David
may
wants
I
to
may
change
you
that for
I
the
may
world.
can no I may can jump in if you like too. But the way that language is used specifically in different situations and contexts is part of what we're talking about here, right? Do you
Yes, totally.
use like you even said salesman, Cheryl? I mean,
No,
you were
it's
never
well, it doesn't
But
it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not a big deal.
to you to
I
you
mean, I mean,
No, no,
but
it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just responding to Jennifer just now, right? But the thing is not a
yeah.
big deal. Why are we debating this now on Tech
I
News?
think that in the end, actually, sorry, as a foreigner, I believe in each country that ever suffered history actually have this taboo situation. Even just we can think China, we can say the numbers 8964. So this taboo situation is something we try to like make peace of. So I think even like this master bedroom thing. Yes, it's a reminder. But with time passing, with all those generation past, we should try to make more peaceful situation for everybody. So that's my point.
I think back to Tyler's point the
Here's,
last time, right? I
but
think it's about
Cheryl,
why do they get hurt so easily, right? Why are they so sensitive?
well, Cheryl brings up an interesting dimension to this conversation, introducing the Asian genderedness of language, which is different than the Latin genderedness of language, because I speak both Spanish basically and Japanese basically, and they both have uh, gender components to the language, but in incredibly different ways. And um, whoever it is who's trying to police language by introducing the Latinx nomenclature, which some have argued is a form of language colonization, which is a bit ironic because the people who are claiming to do this are, most strongly opposed to the concept of colonizing anything, and yet they seem they're sort of acting as language colonizers. Anyhow, the these people generally don't speak Asian languages because they're trying to degender the Latin rooted languages like Spanish and Italian and French and what have you. There's a lot of them. Then you have the Germanic languages, which are not generally very gendered. But then you have the Asian languages, which are, but you don't, in Japanese, you say I'm Nihonjin, that's fine. Male or female, you're Japanese, you're Nihonjin. But in Japanese, the entire verb, conjugation, and formality, and you could even just say the entire language is entirely different. The word choice is entirely different for women than it is for men. Different. You could almost say it's a different language. The Japanese women's language and Japanese men's language are entirely, totally different. So it would drive somebody who's trying to police the genderness of language absolutely bonkers to try and police this, because it's like walking into a country that has two languages and say, no, you can't, you have to all share one language now. That is the most absurd idea I have ever heard, to try and go into Japan and say everyone's going to speak this neutral version, which, by the way, we have in Sweden in a very uh, minuscule example, where it's the he and she, the impersonal pronouns, where they have a new one, which is hen, which is halfway between he and she, and Swedes are adopting this, so they're no longer saying he or she; they're saying kind of a he, she new pronoun. Well, in Japan, you're going to have to come up with every word is going to have to come up with a new in between of the female and the male version of the word, because they speak in different, very different ways, the men and the women in Japan. So, and Thailand as well. There's every sentence ends in a masculine or feminine ending in Thai. Every sentence, every single
ขอบคุณ
sentence.
ค่ะ
So good luck trying to. But by the way, it's in Thailand. It's a non-issue, and we have Thailand is the country more than anywhere that has a legitimate third gender. So, and there's no problem with the how it happens in Thailand, and it's very organic and natural. And if you want to dress in one way or another and speak in one way or another, you can, and no one's going to question it or bother you whatsoever. But there's no forcing of people to, uh, um, you
if
know, there isn't
if
really a policing of the language in the same way that Americans are sensing, which is causing this polarization. But make no mistake, I think the people, this is just the human nature element. I think there's a blowback to every kind of strong agenda, and it could come back and bite people in the ass. And this is precisely one such case where if people feel like they're being pushed to control their language, they're going to violently react against it. And you're seeing that in the form of Twitter is a good example of this. Elon buying Twitter to try and rebalance the scales of power against what, in the ways that Twitter was doing this, is such an example. And you're going to see countermeasures to that Stanford piece that came out, and you just saw MIT come out and say we are forever going to be a fully free speech zone, kind of as a counter to the Stanford thing that just came out. So there will be blowbacks and counter
hey
maneuvers, and
Tyler, can we just take
Tyler,
it balance this out?
I just want to also inject in a perspective, right? In some African countries, in Ethiopia, for example, language has been one of the bigger issues that has been part of, the civil war and or ethnicity based conflict that happens because different ethnicities, like even we were talking about Facebook or other things, uh, we have like 80 something small languages in different parts of the country, but different ethnicity is saying that my language has been like this, or the way you use it is creating that. And language and the way we speak them actually can also really does create the bigger conflict that we don't even think about normally, that the language and the way it's spoken, or who speaks it, or is it widely accepted, or is it being infringed, or things like that. It really does have huge implications. I just want to inject that.
okay, we got to get back to the tech news because we have a hard stop at 12, which is in about 25 minutes. So we left off with this New York Times article about an AI researcher, and that what took us on a 30-minute detour because the New York Times is now a questionable source of information, and that's the real tragedy in all this. Anyway, the next is Associated Press, $1.7 trillion U.S. funding package included the Inform Act, which is forcing Amazon, Meta, and others to verify prolific sellers to combat counterfeit and dangerous goods. The Bitcoin hash rate fell by about 40% On December 24th, over 3 days, as many U.S. based miners paused operations due to blizzards in the U.S. What else? A whole bunch of fundraising. Experts say China's second largest chip factory is barely affected by U.S. sanctions. Chinese government data for
Tyler,
January.
on that crypto story, did it tell you the mechanism by which generally people who make money, if they have a contract price, wouldn't deviate because of the weather unless they were told to by some kind of utility regulator? Does it talk about any of that in that article?
Here, I'll pin it for you. Copy link address. Here we go. It's pinning now. So Chinese government data, this is from South China Morning Post, for 2022 shows that domestic Chinese smartphone shipments fell 22% for 2022. Smartphone shipments, smartphone sales, essentially, well, shipments and sales are a little bit different. Shipments come later in the process. The sales decline first, and then the shipments decline.
So Tyler,
Unless,
so
yeah,
how could those two stats go together? How could that be down 22% and the chip production in China not be affected? You said that was the first or second largest producer. What about the first?
well, that's what I was getting into is the Chinese government data for domestic smartphone shipments declining. Is that because they don't have access to stuff that they previously needed, and so they're not able to make them, or is it due to a drop in demand?
Mm-hmm. Abe Froman,
Because
Abe Froman wants to
it
know.
could be yeah, it could be a drop in demand because the economy is it if this is a demand driven decline because the economy is falling off of a cliff, okay, or is it a I mean, in fairness, it could be a saturation. Maybe that they just everyone's got 5 smartphones and they're not buying them anymore. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt as an option. Oh, and the third option is due to sanctions, they're not able to make the stuff as they used
Mm-hmm.
to, or supply chain. Let's just call it supply chain
Yeah.
issues. I don't know.
So Tyler, I just back channeled Cheryl an article. It's probably from the same source as yours, but it's down the page or something about a Chinese foundry that has been able to get around U.S. sanctions. I think using maybe some older chip designs that are still viable or something like that. I mean, I don't have the story up in front of me anymore because I'm going back and
Yeah, I'll
forth
pin
on
it
my
now.
phone. Yeah, but it probably relates to the ability, at least the ability of to get chips in China. So you're going to pin that up, Cheryl?
Yeah.
Tyler, another part of what the story is clearly that level of granularity needs to be the part of the analysis. Like how much of the market has a phone, how much of the lower income market, but it just hasn't emerged yet. So the implication is how is that going to affect the use of the digital yuan, right? And pardon the mispronunciation, but if it's not like they have little Java cards. Back in the day, we had with the original smart cards, you had a little chip on it, right? How are they going to? I mean, how are they going to actually help? How is this going to affect the deployment of their digital currency?
So Cheryl, that link didn't work probably because of the paywall. So let me see if I could just hit the headline on that for a second. Yeah, and I'll if I pronounce this word wrong, someone help me. It's I think it's pronounced Wah Hang. Gives China new hope with old chip technology. U.S. restrictions on advanced tech help foundry benefit from Beijing shifting view of the semiconductor supply chain. Um, the Huahong Semiconductor has long played second fiddle to China's national champion Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp. In their home of Shanghai. But U.S. restrictions on advanced technology and Beijing's yearning for chip self-sufficiency have thrust it into the spotlight. Already in Hong Kong, China's second largest chip foundry received regulatory approval last month for a $2.5 billion secondary listing in Shanghai on the tech-centric Star Market. Most of the funds to be raised are intended for upgrading and expanding its production facilities. So that this is in the Financial Times, and I guess that we hit a paywall when Cheryl tried to pin it up there. But
Okay. So now we go into the tweets. The first tweet I have today is from Eric that new scientific research identifies 155 new genes that reveal humans are constantly evolving. Valerie found one, AT&T and T and BlackRock to form a commercial fiber optic platform. And I'm retweeting all of these to the Tech News Twitter account as we do, which you should follow because starting Monday we'll be moving over there for the news. And then what else? Elon Musk off. That's an old story from Jeff. What else? Did anyone have a tweet since we met last time? Real life dog behind this Doge. Canada's new all-electric train plane hybrid travels faster than a jet. Transpod's new FluxJet is an electric hybrid between an aircraft and a train, traveling through Canada at speeds of up to 620 miles per hour. It's a plane, it's a train, it's a FluxJet. Um, what else? It looks all kind of everyone's shared stuff that we had seen. Ken, I just saw yours about TikTok security dilemma revives push for U.S. control, like they might be forced to sell it. We covered that yesterday. So yeah, that's what we have for the tweets. The tweets were pretty much covered in the headlines today. BB just found one from South China Morning Post that TikTok's parent company ByteDance jumps into ride hailing in China. Um, TikTok's mainland Chinese version has started to include ride hailing services in its mini app platform. TikTok ride sharing, like Uber.
If that happens in the US, wow, it's harder to remove TikTok in the US.
Yeah, if it becomes more bundled with infrastructure like transportation, yeah. That's a really weird kind of feature. Unless it's because of the social commerce aspect and they're using it to transport the purchases of what's being purchased through the social commerce. So they can get in on the delivery directly rather than being dependent on third parties for delivering. Anyway, there you go. 12 o'clock. Yeah, the tweets were short and sweet today because the headlines kind of covered a lot of it. And it's because we're in the Christmas season where the journalists are all uh, on vacation. So there you
Hey,
go.
Tyler. Tyler.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't know if everybody's in the back channel, but not to confuse